This Wellness Coach podcast is brought to you by our brand new Facebook group called the Wellness Coach Tribe. Come join us and chat about any episode at any time. Keep up to date with all our events and connect with a like-minded group of wellness enthusiasts. To join the Wellness Coach Tribe, simply search for the Wellness Coach Tribe on Facebook.
TheWellnessCouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. This is Up for a Chat with Cindy O'Meara, Karen Smith, and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Karen Smith.
I'm Kim Morrison.
And I'm Cindy O'Meara.
And today's guest is somebody particularly special. In fact, very famous. In fact, I don't think I've ever come across a guest with more letters after his name. We're very, very excited to welcome Peter Brukner to the show. Welcome, Peter. And, you know, I'm not even going to go into what all of the letters are because I don't think I know what they all are, but I'm going to be so excited to hear you explaining them all. But more importantly, your background, who you are, and how you've come to be on today's show.
Well, firstly, it's a great honour to be on the show. I'm delighted to be here. Secondly, don't worry about all those letters. They're just, I don't know what they mean either. I just made them up.
Order of Australian Medal
just looks good. Oh, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
that's the first one. That's the first one.
That cost me a fortune.
Congratulations on that one. I think that is prestigious and that's great.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you want me to tell you my background? I'm a doctor, so graduated from Melbourne University, and then my passion's always been sport. So to no one's great surprise, I finished up in sports medicine, and I initially got involved opening up a clinic here in Melbourne, Olympic Park Sports Medicine Centre, which is still going strong 30 odd years later. And then I started working with various teams. AFL teams, Melbourne and Collingwood. If you're in sports medicine in Melbourne, you've got to do an AFL team at some stage. So I did that. Then I had a long period of time with sort of national teams and swimming, hockey, athletics. Did a couple of Olympics, Atlanta and then Sydney. That was a great experience. And then what did I do after that? Then I took a bit of a break from travelling with teams and then got involved with Melbourne University and did a lot of media work, and then got back into teams. So I did the Socceroos for the 2010 World Cup, or the 3 or 4 years leading up to that in the World Cup. And then from there I went straight to England to work with Liverpool Club in the English Premier League. Did a couple of years there, and then cricket. So I did 5 years with the Aussie cricket team, including the World Cup win and a couple of Ashes and various other tours, and finished up with that a couple of years ago now, well before the cricket team's indiscretions, for which I take no responsibility. Clearly they were missing my moral guidance over the last year or two, but and then the last couple of years I've been involved in the sort of second part of my career, if you like, which has been my interest in public health and particularly in nutrition.
Peter, just before Cindy gets in there, because I know that once she starts, we won't all get a word in ways, but just before we do, so you're saying 30 years ago you were in Melbourne. You didn't happen to speak at Olympic Park with Karen Inge and yourself for the Collingwood football. Was that you then?
Yeah, could have been. Yes.
I knew it. I was in the audience, and there you were. 30 years ago, I was listening to you.
You don't look any different. It's amazing.
But, it was around the time when ultramarathon running was quite big, and Yanis Kouros was in Melbourne.
Yes,
and I had just got into ultramarathon running at that time. Right. And I remember a group of you doctors at Olympic Park Sports Medicine finding him very intriguing and quite I guess, an enigma in many ways. Can you tell me a little bit as opposed to a medical doctor, as opposed to a sports doctor? Obviously, there's the differences around you're looking at more maybe the functionality of the human body and what that is. How has that made you look at life in general from a sports perspective as opposed to a general life perspective?
Well, look, I mean, ultimately, a sports medicine doctor is primarily a doctor, so your first priority is your patient. And it just happens that my patients tend to be active patients, which is fantastic. I'm working. That's one of the best things about being in sports medicine is that, you're working with an audience that exercises, that wants to get healthy, that wants to get better. So that's probably one of the big differences between the patients we see. Everyone is desperate to get better. They want to get back to their sport or their activity. And the funny thing is that it doesn't matter whether you're a professional athlete being paid, £100,000 a week to play football for Liverpool, or whether you just want to walk the dog or play your midweek tennis match or so on. People can be just as passionate about their recovery and about getting back to what they're doing. And, I don't assume that anyone, just because you're not playing professional sport, that doesn't mean you don't want to get back to it as soon as you can. So that's the nice thing about working in sports medicine is people want to get better. You tell them to stand on their head for 3 hours, they'll do it. It's really good to work with that motivated group of people. And I guess, being around people who exercise and realise the importance of diet and lifestyle factors, I guess, has sort of, led me to understand the importance of those factors in life. As doctors, we're trained very much to look after disease and particularly with medications. That's our sort of modus operandi. That's what we're taught. And that, what I've discovered over the last few years, I guess, is that that's a very limited way of doing things, and it's much more practical and advantageous to everyone if we actually try and prevent these diseases. And if they do come, treat them with diet and with exercise and with stress management and things like that. Much better than piling one drug on top of the other, and if they don't work, well, we'll do an operation or whatever. So that's been a real sort of sea change for me, I guess, in the last 7 years now. And I've really sort of changed my practice completely away from looking after athletes with injuries, I guess, to try to looking after people's sort of metabolic health and their general sort of health, and trying to, we just are getting, fatter and sicker as a nation the whole time. I mean, it's just crazy. Australia is one of the top 6 fattest nations in the world, and I mean, how can that happen? We've got a wonderful climate, we're a wealthy country, we're well educated, we've got access to fresh food everywhere. How can we be one of the fattest and sickest countries in the world? So I guess, my mission really over the last few years and the future is really to try and address that issue and try and improve the health of Australians.
Well, I know the dietitians are not blaming the dietary guidelines because they're saying that only 1% of the Australian population follow the dietary guidelines. That's what was in the paper last week. Could you say it's the dietary guidelines that's made us fatter and sicker, or do you think the dietitians are right and nobody's following anything and we're all doing our own thing?
Oh, look, I think certainly the dietary guidelines have contributed. It's very interesting looking back on how the dietary guidelines came about. I mean, they came about in the USA back in the late 1970s, 1980. And at that time, there were sort of 2 schools of thought. There was a school of thought that proclaimed that sugar was the problem, and there was a school of thought in America, that was in Britain mainly, and the school of thought in the United States where they said fat was the problem. And obviously the fat people, the people who thought fat was the problem, won out, and they convinced the American government. And basically, the basis of their of how they convinced people was on fraudulent research. It was on a research paper that has since clearly been shown to be fraudulent. The 7 country study, where they isolated 7 countries out of a total of 22. And made out that there was a direct relationship between the amount of fat in their diet and their mortality. Whereas when you looked at the whole 22 countries, there was no such relationship at all. And that was the whole basis of the changes into the dietary guidelines, or the introduction of the dietary guidelines around 1980. And at the time, it was remarkable. They set up the US Senate set up a committee of dietary experts, and those dietary experts recommended that there, for instance, should be 2 servings of grains and cereals and bread per day. and they sent the recommendations to the US Department of Agriculture, and it came back with 6 to 9 servings. So, it was really not on the basis of any science at all. And even at the time, the medical fraternity in the US said, you can't do this. There's no evidence for this. And, the Senate said, no, we can't wait for the evidence. And, people have still since gone back and looked at all the evidence that was available then, and there was absolutely no science behind these dietary guidelines. So we were all told, the whole Western society really has been on this 40-year experiment of removing fat from our diet. We were told to remove fat, and the food industry did. It was low-fat this and low-fat that, and full-fat dairy was out, and butter was replaced by margarine, and we weren't allowed to have eggs because they had cholesterol, and so on. And that's, what happened then was that the food industry quickly realised that when you take the fat out of food, you actually take all the flavour out. So they thought, this is a problem. But their solution to the problem was very clever. They just replaced the fat with sugar. So really what we've been on for the last 30 or 40 years is a low-fat, high-sugar diet. And that's been disastrous. I mean, we've got fatter and sicker every single year for 40 years. And, it seems to me, if you're running a business and your bottom line got steadily worse every year for 40 years, wouldn't you at some stage in that 40 years think, hey, hang on a minute, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we need to change something. No, we just keep going along with the same guidelines, telling people that fat is the evil and allowing people to have as many carbohydrates as they like. And it's time to change. I mean, that's clearly been a disastrous failure. It's been the biggest worldwide experiment that's ever been conducted. And you'd have to say it's been a disastrous failure.
Peter, can I ask you, as a doctor, and you hear this and you've seen this and you've watched this, do you, as a doctor, I don't know what the right word is, do you feel shame in the profession for this? Is it the profession that you would like to have a hard look at, or is it government? Is it policy? Is it the conglomerates and the big corporations? Is there anyone that we can say should take accountability here?
All of the above. We all have to take some responsibility for it. Certainly as a medical profession, I think we've let our patients down. But look, in a way, I don't blame individual doctors, because that's what we're taught. I did medicine a fair while ago, but I did not have a single lecture on nutrition, not a single lecture on exercise in my whole 6 years of medical study. Now, no, I don't think things have changed that much. Our whole education is that we're taught to treat diseases and to treat them with medications. So, you stay in your comfort zone. You do what you're taught. And I can't blame individual doctors for that, because they're just doing what they've been taught and what they're told. But as a profession as a whole, I think, yes, we've got to take some responsibility, along with all those other groups that you mentioned, because obviously there's a lot of people with vested interest now in maintaining the status quo. There is the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, they're all making billions and billions of dollars out of the current status. So it's very hard to change things. There are a lot of analogies with tobacco, actually, and a lot of people are saying sugar is the new tobacco, and there are obviously people who are trying to sort of hose that message down about smoking being harmful, and they succeeded for about 20 years. Even though the evidence was there, the industry just succeeded in preventing people realising that. But eventually, the truth came out, and I'm hoping the same will happen with sugar.
Absolutely. And if you had a message to the end, I guess, user, the person, us, the public, what would be your message to instigate hope, and what would be your advice in as far as taking responsibility? Because we obviously look to doctors for answers. We look to doctors often in cases to fix or heal us, yet we are the ones that should be taking responsibility. What's your advice to us?
Well, I think the advice is that you can significantly affect your health by your own choices, and the two most important things are diet and exercise. And I think as far as diet goes, if I just had to summarise it all in one line, I'd just say JERF, JERF, which of course stands for Just Eat Real Food. So basically, if you stick to real food and avoid processed foods, processed foods, sugar, they contain seed oils, they contain grains, and they're really they're really not healthy. If you stick to, real foods, meat, fish, fruit, vegetables, nuts, drink mainly water, you're going to take control of your health and make a massive difference. So just that one simple thing, by start opening up your cupboard, throwing out everything that's in a packet or a can, and just eating fresh food, and you'll be a whole lot. We can reverse these epidemics. This obesity epidemic. We can reverse type 2 diabetes. By taking sugar and carbohydrates out of our diet. We don't have to revert to drugs and so on. So, we can really make a big change, which is quite exciting, I think.
Can we talk about your health and when you became enlightened by nutrition? As you said, you never studied it, not even one lesson or one class at school. So what happened? How did you find that diet might be the answer to what was happening out there?
Well, I just gone along with everyone else, the same, eating a low-fat diet and low-fat this and low-fat that and exercising regularly. And I thought, I should have been pretty healthy. But 6-7 years ago, living in England, I just turned 60, which was the age that my father had developed type 2 diabetes. So I was pretty conscious, that I didn't want to go down that track. And, probably if you'd asked me, how was I or was I healthy, I'd have said, yeah, I'm fine. I hadn't had any illnesses. I guess, my blood pressure was good. I was healthy. I was eating a low-fat diet. And my blood sugar was fine. I'd have probably said I was okay. But the reality was that, I had that family history. I was overweight, become obese. I was right on the borderline of overweight obesity. I'd probably, like so many, middle-aged people, I'd probably put on 0.5 kilogram a year for 30 years, just gradually getting fatter every year. And, my kids are starting to poke me in the stomach and say, come on, Dad, what about it? And I'm shrugging my shoulders and saying, well, I'm doing all the right things. I'm on this low-fat diet and I exercise and so on. It's not my fault, but also I probably, metabolically I wasn't healthy. But, I had blood tests done then and I had a high triglyceride level, which is one of the important lipids. I had a high insulin level. I had a thing called a fatty liver, which is something I'd had for 10 years, and it's a fatty infiltration of your liver. Like a typical doctor, I completely ignored it and pretended it would go away, and I figured I was on a low-fat diet, so I'd be fine, and I didn't really understand fatty liver. So I probably wasn't quite as healthy as I thought. And in retrospect, I was clearly pre-diabetic. I mean, I have no doubt that if I'd continued on that frame by now, I would be a fully fledged diabetic. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So I had a bit of a sort of a eureka moment back then, and a colleague of mine in South Africa by the name of Tim Noakes, who's probably known to a lot of your listeners, sports science guru, old friend of mine. We'd known each other for a long, long time, and he's a super smart guy, and he'd challenged a few orthodoxies in sports science over the years, and always been proven right. So when he came out and said that he'd been wrong, and that he'd been a great advocate of carbohydrates for runners, he was a runner himself, and he wrote a book called The Law of Running, which is sort of the Bible for all distance runners. And he said no, he'd been wrong, and he'd actually developed type 2 diabetes himself and become quite unwell, and completely reversed all his problems by swapping from a high carbohydrate diet to a low carbohydrate diet with plenty of healthy fat. And he came out and said that, and I thought, whoa, boy, that's a big call. And I thought, Tim's finally lost his marbles. But I thought, given I had such respect for him, I thought, no, I need to look into this. So I read a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by an author called Gary Taubes, who is an American science writer. And that was a book that just blew me away. I mean, it not only sort of talked about the relative merits of fats and carbohydrates, about that politics that I mentioned before, about how the sort of the low-fat movement won out over the low-carb movement. And it was really scary stuff. And I remember putting it down at night and thinking, no, this couldn't be right. Like, couldn't have got this such a basic thing, the diet, the whole Western society, is wrong, and then there's no evidence for it in the first place. So I found it really quite confronting and got me, inspired me to read lots more stuff, and which I did. And the more I read, the more I got disturbed. And I thought, God, this is, this couldn't be right. This is incredible. And so I thought, well, it was time to sort of do an experiment. And those of the scientists among us who would know that when you do an experiment with an n equals 1, the experiment is not really very valid, but except when the 1 is you, in which case the n equals 1 becomes very important. So I decided it was time for an n equals 1 experiment, the 1 being me. So on day 1, I got all my bloods done, and sure enough, high insulin, fatty liver, all that sort of stuff. And then I went on a low-carb, sort of healthy fat diet. So what that meant was that I stopped eating anything with sugar. I stopped eating starchy foods, bread, cereal, pasta, rice, potatoes. Stopped drinking fruit juice, cut back on my fruit intake, just stuck to berries, and that sort of thing. So, and the way I ate was really probably the way my parents and grandparents had eaten, sort of meat and fish and lots of veggies, green veg, some berries. I went back to full cream and full fat milk and dairy products. I went back to eating eggs, sacked the margarine and replaced it with butter. And I'd have sort of nuts and so on. So, I did that, and pretty soon some amazing things happened. I mean, the first thing I noticed from day 1 virtually was I stopped being hungry. So instead of sort of having my cereal for breakfast at 8 o'clock and then by 11 o'clock being starving again, I'd have my eggs and bacon for breakfast, and I wouldn't feel hungry all day. So I went from eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day to probably eating 2 meals a day, and just wasn't hungry. And then I weighed myself every week, and I just kept losing weight, and it was fantastic. I was eating all this lovely food, and I was never hungry, and I sort of almost felt guilty. This is just too easy. I thought losing weight was supposed to be hard, but it was fantastic. And then I started to feel better. I had more energy. I stopped falling asleep. Sort of that after lunch sort of sleepiness. I slept better at night. I stopped snoring. My exercise got better, and my concentration got better, and all these sort of positive things were happening, and I kept losing weight. So I did it for 3 months, so 13 weeks, lost 13 kilograms in 13 weeks, never being hungry. The more fat I ate, the more fat I lost. I just couldn't believe it, because it was the hardest thing was getting my head around the fact that it was okay to eat fat again. For 30 years we've been told fat is bad, it's going to clog your arteries, can't have fat. And sort of, trying to reverse that, it was quite challenging. But, I just kept seeing the results. And so I lost, 13 kilograms in 13 weeks. I did my blood tests at the end of that. My triglycerides had come down by half. They were down to normal. My insulin levels were normal. And the fatty liver that I had for 10 years had completely disappeared in 3 months. Unbelievable. And so, I thought this is a pretty good 3 months' work, I lost all this weight. I feel fantastic, and all my metabolic markers have improved dramatically. And I've gone from being someone who was on the verge of becoming diabetic to being perfectly normal. And there was one serious disadvantage, though. I had to buy a new wardrobe. So, I went down 2 sizes in trousers and so on. But I figured that was a fairly small price to pay. But so that's been a long-winded story, I know. But that's really how I got into this. And as a result of that, I thought, well, I need to tell people about this, So I've become an advocate for it and tried to sort of spread the message around, the public and the sporting community and to send a message out to GPs, to doctors, to physios, to anyone who will listen to me, basically, even people on your podcast. So I just have a mission to try and get that message out there that we can control our health, and if we eat properly, then it can make a massive difference to our lives.
So, were you with the cricket team when this happened?
It was just before. It was actually sort of between my first 2 tours with the cricket team. So by the time I turned up for the second tour, the boys couldn't believe it. They said, "What's happened to you, Doc? What have you been doing? You faded away, half the man you used to be." And so they were pretty impressed. Sorry,
what years were you with the cricket team?
2012 to 2017. So, yeah. So
they're very lucky to get you. And I think they could do with you again right now. They seem to be in a little bit of a lull, don't they? Not that I'm a Kiwi going on about how great New Zealand's doing at the moment, but my husband played cricket for New Zealand for 10 years, Peter, and the nutritional advice back in the late 80s, early 90s was, in fact, a gentleman rang and said that they needed to eat more fat, more pig. They needed to go running and pig hunting so that they got better hand-eye coordination. To me, it's sounding very functional movement and very caveman way of eating as opposed to the fine wine and gentleman's game that it is. Have you seen much change even in that short period, that 5 years you were with the team? Was there much change in attitude around nutrition? Because a lot of cricketers didn't seem to have a very positive, healthy attitude to food, if I can be honest.
No, that's right. And I did come across your husband in a few of his commentary gigs, in various countries around the world. Look, there was a variety of responses. And a number of the guys because it was tricky because the team had a dietitian who was doing all the usual sort of, low fat and lots of carbs sort of thing. So some of the guys got a bit disillusioned with that, and so they'd quietly sort of come and see me and have a chat about diet and so on. A number of them did adopt a low-carb diet, and with some pretty impressive results. One of them had quite a significant arthritic problem, and he pretty much got over that, or, I won't say cured, but basically got rid of all his symptoms by adopting a low-carb diet. And that was sort of pretty dramatic. And a number of them, lost significant amounts of weight. Because the bizarre thing, as you alluded to, here are these guys who are full-time professional athletes who are still overweight. It's sort of hard to imagine, really. I mean, they're exercising all day, every day, and yet they're still overweight because they were on the wrong sort of the wrong diet. And so a number of them, I think they became a lot more food conscious. It became a bit of a joke after a while. Careful, the doc's watching sort of thing. But I didn't sort of force it on them at all. It wasn't really my role. But I think they all started to eat a lot better, and I think it's had a significant impact on their performances over that period.
How did the dietitian take it?
Well, it was tricky there for a while, and I think look, I think it's very hard for dietitians, and because basically, again, they've been taught one thing and they've been telling people one thing for all their careers, and all of a sudden, there are people coming along sort of challenging that, and they feel very, very threatened and so on. So, it's there's certainly not, it's not all wrong what they've been telling people. I mean, there's certainly there is a role for carbohydrates in elite sport and so on. But it's more, my concern for the average person, really, rather than the elite athlete. That they'll manage fine, but my real concern is for the average person who's putting on weight, becoming insulin resistant, heading towards type 2 diabetes, and with all the sort of disastrous consequences that occur as a result of that. So I guess that's more my focus now rather than the elite athlete. But they can certainly benefit from if you improve your diet. The other good things is that as well as the weight loss and so on, you improve your recovery. You get less inflammation. So there's a lot of advantage to the athlete to getting on a low carb, healthy fat diet.
I've been listening to Dave Feldman. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I know Dave well. Yes, yeah,
yeah, and the cholesterol code and the phenotype, where somebody like you're talking about, an athlete that's a marathon runner, may have higher LDL and higher levels than what the normal person will have. And I'm finding that really interesting. Have you been following him? And if so, do you want to explain what that means?
Well, I couldn't do Dave justice, really. I do know Dave very well. We've spoken at a number of conferences together, and he's been out to Australia the last 3 years, I think, Dave, to speak at one of our conferences and so on. He's a fascinating character, and like so many of the people who are prominent in this world, if you like, then he's not medical. And they're very much, there's a lot of engineers who have become very interested in this whole thing. And I always sort of look at engineers as people who think pretty logically and look at the evidence and make decisions and so on. So it's probably not surprising, and they don't come with all the baggage that that us doctors and dietitians do. They can sort of come at it afresh. And Dave's one of these people who looks at the evidence and he experiments a lot on himself. He must have a blood test every day, I think, look at his results and so on. So I wonder if he's got any blood left. But Dave's someone who what he's done in a nutshell is show the variability. Everyone, the medical profession's been obsessed with LDL, which is the so-called bad cholesterol, and everyone's been convinced that that's you've got to lower your LDL levels, which is why people go on statins and things like that. And what Dave's shown is that there's massive variability in LDL. They are both genetic and also depending on diet. And, he's actually raised his LDL to ridiculous levels by just, filling himself with fat for 3 days, So, he's shown it's a very labile and probably not as relevant and important as the rest of the medical profession suggest. And that there are, certain people who generate very high levels of LDL, and that in some cases can actually be quite healthy and so on. So I think what we're really focusing on now is not so much the total cholesterol levels or your LDL levels, but it's more your triglycerides and your HDL levels, and particularly your triglyceride HDL ratio. And that's a really good indicator of your prospective health and your insulin resistance levels and so on. So this obsession with cholesterol, I think, is hopefully will soon be a thing of the past, and we'll focus more on other issues, and particularly your sugar levels, and which are best measured with your glucose levels or your HbA1c levels and so on. So I think really it's just another indicator that it's not sort of fats that are the problem; it's sugars that are the problem.
Yeah, I think what we've done is we've done so many extremes. So first of all, salt was a problem, and then fat, and then now sugar. And I think protein must be up next. I'm just not sure. But that's what I've noticed. I've been, I started my life at university to do dietetics, and basically, back then salt was an issue, and then fat became the issue, and like I said, sugar, and I don't know, it'll be protein. Well, it is actually. A protein is being absolutely abused in the way of meat. So, everyone's going vegan and plant-based and saying that meat's bad for us. So, what do you think is going to be the next thing that we're going to see? With your knowledge of what has happened in the past.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the anti-meat movement and the vegan movement, and that really worries me at the moment because, that meat is probably the single, or animal products, meat and dairy and eggs and so on, are the most nutrient-dense, nutritious foods that we have. They're low in sugar, low in carbohydrate. There's lots of healthy fats and lots of good protein, and they're very nutrient dense. Whereas a lot of processed foods are very what we call empty calories. There's no vitamins and minerals and protein associated with them and so on. And I guess I don't have a problem at all with people going vegan if that's their choice, and if it's for reasons of animal welfare or whatever. I'm fine. That's cool. No problems at all. I think it's more challenging to be healthy when you're vegan, but it's certainly possible. But the way the vegan movement is trying to sort of skew the evidence and force everyone into feeling guilty about eating meat and so on. I mean, they come up with this environmental argument, which is really there's just as much evidence that plants are a problem, if crops are a problem for the environment as it is that grazing cattle, for instance, are. I mean, there's a lot of positive things that grazing cattle do to our soil and to and carbon sink and so on. So, the evidence is not sort of all one way, and same with health. It's actually harder to be healthy on a vegan diet. You actually have to take supplements. So to me, a diet can't be natural, if you have to take supplements as well. And I think it's, if that's their choice, as I said, I respect that. That's fine. But don't try and tell us that it's healthier or more environmentally friendly to be vegan. And I'll probably cop all the sort of the vegan fanatics now trolling me and abusing me. But that's the reality. I mean, I've done a lot of studying, and I've tried to look at both sides of this argument. And there are all sorts of things that are bad for the environment. They talk about even the animal welfare thing. Well, if you plough fields, you destroy thousands of smaller animals and insects and so on. They don't seem to be a problem. It's all the larger animals that are the problem. So on. So it's a very complex field, and just not as simple as as everyone makes out it is. So I think, but just purely from a health point of view, I think there are a lot of advantages to eating meat and eggs. Eggs are a very nutritious food. It's just a tragedy that for so many years, we were told that eggs were full of cholesterol, even though all the experts knew that the cholesterol in the food makes no difference to the cholesterol in your blood, but it was still an excuse to vilify eggs. And all those horrible egg white omelettes that people had to have for years. God, tasteless and useless, really. And so I think eggs are a fantastic food, and dairy products. It's been shown, they're associated with improved mortality and so on. So, it's this whole, it seems to be based more on sort of, religion and all this sort of fervour of vegans, and I think everyone's got to respect each other's choices and opinions, and I don't want it sort of forced on me, or people trying to make us feel guilty because we're eating meat. I mean, that's our choice, and respect that choice. As I respect the vegan's choice to not eat meat.
Yeah. How has your family done with your complete change around? Have they followed suit, or have you had some antagonists within the family wondering what you're doing? And I'm just not talking about your personal family, but your medical family as well. How's that gone?
Yeah, well, the kids call it the cult. They said, Dad's off talking about the cult. But it's a bit of a family joke. But no, the immediate family have been very supportive, and by and large have bought into the concepts of reducing sugar and processed foods and eating real foods. I've got a little grandson now who's not doesn't have any processed food. He just has fresh food, and he's thriving. And I sort of shudder to think of some of the things that we gave our kids, years ago, and probably wasn't doing them any favours, to be honest. As far as my medical colleagues go, I think probably a mixed reaction is fair to say. The majority of them have been polite and interested, and willing to listen. And I think many of them are coming around to this way of thinking. I just recently gave a talk at our big sports medicine conference in Queenstown, New Zealand. The Australasian sort of sports physicians, and there was a big crowd at our nutrition talks, and a lot of positive comments. So, I think if people have it explained to them and get the opportunity to listen to what we're talking about and read what we're talking about, they can see the logic of it. And the other thing is that, their patients are telling them, their patients are telling them, hey, I've tried this low carb stuff and it works. I've lost weight. I've reversed my type 2 diabetes. My arthritis feels better. My depression's reduced. These are things that patients are telling their doctors all the time, and doctors have got to listen. They've got to listen and take note. So in a way, it's ironic, isn't it, that these patients are educating doctors.
Yeah, and I often wondered why, before nutrition was being talked about back in the 80s, I often wondered why the doctors weren't saying to people, go see a dietitian or go see someone. They seem to be not sending them that way. And what I realised is that the dietary guidelines at that stage were not working, and they were not seeing the changes. It's not until Gary Torbs and Tim Noakes and Zoe Harcum, and then we've got Dave Feldman and Ivor Cummins and yourself are beginning to, speak up and go, hey, maybe they're not right and maybe we need to do something different. But the sad thing is, Peter, is that when I read this article, and actually Karen pointed it out to me, when I read the article, it was that they believed that the Dietitians Association of Australia still felt there needed to be an education program about the dietary guidelines, and there was nothing wrong with them at this point. It was because people weren't following it that was the problem. So, I think it's changing. I think it's turning. There's more dietitians. I have dietitians doing my functional nutrition academy. So they're beginning to question, the guidelines and what they were taught. I was taught that, I was taught the exact same thing in the 80s, in the early 80s. So it's good to see you talking. I have to tell everybody, I listened to you speak. You spoke just before me at one of Luke Heinz's events. And my event coordinator is looking at me and saying, well, he's just talking your talk, Cindy. He's just saying what you would be saying. And so I had to change my whole talk.
Oh, I'm sorry, Cindy. I'm sorry.
No, that was fine. It was because I realised that it was just brilliant. You were just saying it, and Ruth's just looking at me going, that could be your slide, Cindy. That could be your slide. And he was using my computer, by the way, everybody, but no.
Oh, there you go. See?
But it was wonderful to see you up there, and I know you're on the speaking circuit a lot. So how do people find you? I've got your book in front of me, The Fat Lot of Good, so I'll make sure that goes on the show notes. So how else do they find you if they want you for a speaking engagement?
Just contact me through the Fat Lot of Good website. There's lots of stuff on there, and all my different lectures and podcasts, and hopefully this one shortly. You can contact me directly, and I'm happy to come and talk to. I gave over 60 talks last year, worked it out, and to all sorts of groups, to seminars like, the one we met at Luke Heinz's ones, but also, to GPs, to physio practices, to massage practices, to Rotary clubs, to workplaces, to schools. It's sort of basically, I'll go anywhere, anytime to talk about this message. And I don't take any payment. I just ask for a donation to Sugar by Half, our campaign to reduce sugar. And I'm happy to talk, because I just think we've just got to get the message out there, and that's the best way I have of doing that. I mean, I really didn't want to write a book, to be honest. I got approached, and I said, my first, response was, look, there's so many books out there, really, does the world need another diet book, but they convinced me that, I had some credibility as a doctor and an Australian doctor. There weren't, really any other books by Australian doctors, and that I hopefully might have an effect on some people. And the book's selling incredibly well. It's just, it's on fourth reprint now, fifth reprint, I think. And it's really, it's going well. And I get, so much good feedback. It's amazing. People write and say that it's changed their lives and so on. I mean, no one ever used to write to me saying that changed my life when I fixed their knee or their ankle. But anyway, I get lots of it now.
Well, my husband saw the book when I brought it home. He saw it and he said, oh, can I read that? You should see it. It's dog-eared. It's got pink highlights. It's ticked. It's circled. It's everything. So thank you for writing that book. He really enjoyed it because he's also interested in this whole thing.
Yeah, no, it seems to be, people have had a good response to it. So I'm glad I did it. It was hard work at the time, but, it's always worth it in the end. But, you just get such good feedback. I had an interesting one the other day. I was standing in the coffee queue, and this girl came up to me. This is at the university. I do some lecturing, and she said, oh, I was at your lecture the other day. I said, oh, that's good, blah, blah. And she said, oh, that's not what I want to talk to you about. I said, oh, God, here we go. What's what I've done wrong. And she said, oh, my husband's a massive cricket fan, and because of you, we changed our diet a few years ago. And I said, oh, great. And he said, well, he's had bipolar disease all his life, and he's now off all his medication, and it's completely changed our lives. And I just want to say thank you. And I could hardly speak. You sort of think, wow, if you can just do that for one person, it makes the whole thing worthwhile. And so, the number of, and I'm sure you all, have the same response, from your clients and so on. I mean, you get so much positive feedback. It's so rewarding, and it just encourages you to go out there and try and spread the messages, as far and as wide as you can.
Do you have much animosity?
Not to my face. I'm sure there are. One dietitian got up in a lecture and said I should be in jail, but
Really?
yeah, we said Tim Noakes and Peter Brukner should be in jail, and I thought, I'd love to be in jail with Tim Noakes. It'd be fantastic. I could blame for having to myself for a few days. It'd be great. But look, I'm sure there are lots of people talking behind my back. Usually they're too polite to say it to my face, but. Look, we all have, different ideas, and I respect other people's ideas, and I would hope people would do the same with me. But by and large, look, certainly the response I get on a personal basis is incredibly positive, and people feel really interested in this, and then they feel, they get it. They say, we have been doing it wrong, and that's why. And if people understand that and want to change things, then they can make a massive difference. I gave a seminar recently with a guy who was over 200 kilograms, and he had horrible arthritis. He was taking all these drugs. He had psoriasis all over his body, and he changed to stopped eating sugar and carbohydrates sort of overnight on the 1st of January a couple of years ago. And he's now under 100 kilograms. He just ran his first marathon. He's off all his medication. And the interesting thing is he worked out what his medications were costing the Australian taxpayer in subsidised medications. And it was nearly $20,000 a year. And he's now off all those. Wow. So imagine how much money we could save just by reducing medications if we got people eating properly and exercising regularly, let alone the treatment costs of treating all the complications of type 2 diabetes, all the heart attacks, all the amputations, all the kidney problem, all the kidney dialysis and so on. I mean, if you're talking about nothing else, just purely from a financial point of view, why don't governments get that? The government could massively reduce the health costs in this country if it changed its attitude to and put some effort into prevention. But there's too many people who want to keep maintaining the status quo for their own benefit.
A while ago, I worked out how many subscriptions were dished out in Australia and divided it by the Australian people, and it came to that the average Australian will take 42,000 pills in their life.
God.
That's pretty scary. Pretty scary.
Yeah. And probably very few of that 42,000 would have been necessary. Had they had a proper diet and exercise and so on. So it's just it's one of those frustrating things. When something seems so obvious to you, why does it seem so obvious? So very frustrating. But we've got to keep battling away and keeping getting that message out. That's my aim for the next few years, is just to get the message out as much as I possibly can. And thank you for this opportunity to talk to your millions of listeners. It's fantastic.
Thank you. So have you got any last words of wisdom that you'd like to tell our listeners?
Oh gosh, I've been talking enough, I think. Look, I think is that you can take control of your own health. I think that's the important thing, and you can do it very simply. This is not difficult. People say, "Oh, it's so hard. I could never give up bread, or I could never do this or never that." It's really not hard, because you see the results, and you see how much better you feel and better you look, and how much healthier you are. So it makes it so rewarding. And people say, "Oh, how do you stick to that way of eating?" And I say, "Well, I just feel really good, and I feel as though I'm healthy." So it's not hard. And the other thing is that people think, "Oh, you're having this miserable diet, and you can't enjoy your food." I mean, I've enjoyed every meal I've had for the last 7 years. I mean, there's lots of great food you can have. Fresh sort of food and meat and fish. And people say, "Oh, but what about when you go out to a restaurant?" And I mean, with the cricket team, we'd eat out 300 nights a year. And I never once, couldn't find something that I really liked that was, appropriate for the way I wanted to eat. There's always alternatives. You go to an Italian, people say, "Oh, you can't have pizza or pasta." I said, "Well, there's always a really nice, veal and mushrooms and cream, or there's lots of options." So, or fish or whatever. So look, it's not as hard as people think. You just got to take the plunge and and you'll get such rewards that it'll be it'll make it easy.
Couldn't agree more. All right, Miss Kimmy, what are the two things that you got from Dr. Peter?
Oh, sorry, I was talking with the mute button on. Pete, I just firstly want to know, Collingwood, are you a supporter of Collingwood? I just need to know that.
Well, I actually did a year as a Collingwood head of the medical section at Collingwood many years ago. So, look, it was quite funny actually, because I came home and told my family, that I'm going to be working for Collingwood, and the kids go, "Dad, you hate Collingwood. You always hated Collingwood." And my wife, who's standing behind me, says, "Children, everyone has his price." And so I quickly had to forget about my hatred for Collingwood. But no, I do. I'm pretty neutral because I worked for a few different clubs, Melbourne and Collingwood, and I've had sort of done some work at Hawthorn, St Kilda, Richmond, and so on. So I'm a bit of a neutral. I love my footy, but I'm one of the rare sort of football people in Melbourne there that love football, but it's probably neutral. So.
Very, very diplomatic, I feel.
It's amazing how good the umpires are when you're neutral. It's incredible.
I think what I'd love to say that I've taken away from you is, first of all, I'm so excited that you were part of my fitness leadership and personal training diploma that I did many years ago in the late 80s in Melbourne, and it only just occurred to me then that you were one of the lecturers that I got to listen to. So I just want to say thank you for that, because you've actually had an impact on my life, because at that time I was also an athlete. I got selected for the Australian ultramarathon team to run in the UK in a 24-hour event, and it was your talk that I remember got me very focused on how to look after myself. Now, I don't recall you specifically speaking like this, but I recall you having a very holistic approach to sports medicine, and I loved that. Is that true to say that that's where you were still sitting back then?
Oh, look, probably not as much as now. I'll have to admit. I've always sort of tried to be reasonably holistic, but I guess I just didn't understand nutrition that well then. I just went along with what everyone else was saying, and I didn't really question it. And I feel bad that for all that time I didn't really but you tend to sort of just believe what you're taught and believe what you're told, and you sort of assume that the people who do the dietary guidelines know what they're talking about, and when you're looking into it you think, oh boy,
I recall with you the real welfare of the athlete, that conversation more around that, because I remember listening to Karen Inge more about the nutrition, but yourself was around the welfare and the rehabilitation of the body after hard workouts and things. And I think that's what I really do recall from you. From today, what I can honestly say, what I've taken away from you, is that whole thing that everybody is responsible for the place that we're all in this situation with our health and getting sicker and sicker over 40 years. I think rather than, there's nowhere to blame. I have to be honest with you, Peter, I'm completely shocked that there is no study on nutrition or exercise to become a medical doctor, or very, very little. When I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a medical practitioner, and I'm not sitting here with a high and mighty attitude. But from my point of view, being the end person that I go and seek my advice and to get advice from experts like yourself, I would love to know that you understood that if every one of those 50 trillion cells is affected by food coming in and the way we assimilate and then eliminate, surely nutrition, just like petrol in a Formula One sports car, is important. I would imagine, I can't imagine how that's not an important focus. And I'm hoping that might change. So I'm interested if there is any mindset conversations that you have as a medical practitioner as well. But yes, your JERF conversation has certainly pushed the buttons again. I think that's a great thing. And if people have never heard that concept before, I've always appreciated that, just eat real food. So thank you. And you yourself going through a crisis, obviously, you took one for the team, and you've become the beautiful, amazing doctor that you are. And we're very grateful to have you on the show. So thank you. They're my takeaways.
Oh, it's very kind of you. Thanks. It's been a real pleasure. And look, as far as the education of doctors goes, look, I think we are slowly getting there. I've been invited to speak at one of the medical schools on nutrition and so on. So, hopefully we'll get there in the next few years. And, I'm hoping that, as more and more people, understand the importance of nutrition, that it will eventually get onto the medical curriculum. But it's going to take a little while, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I think for me, my greatest takeaways from today's podcast, and I haven't had much of a chance to talk today.
I'm sorry. I do waffle on. I'm sorry.
No, it's us.
Oh, no, Peter, not you at all. We have this giggle between us because when we have a guest on the show that, we're particularly honed into and passionate about, we kind of just go nuts. It's awesome to listen to it. It's absolutely awesome. So I've had the luxury of being able to sit back and listen today, which has been an absolute treat. And I feel that, there've been a couple of things that I've thought of while I've been listening to you, in that I come from very much the psychological mindset side of things, and being able to have a holistic approach, the mind, the body, the soul, the lot. And what's been really interesting in listening to you is that you have a voice that sounds so patient and sounds so congruent, where I can imagine there would have been times of enormous frustration dealing with a antiquated mindset, or a mindset that is still very much stuck in one direction. So I want to take my hat off to you and commend you for being so prolific and so connected to your message, that it's, you've got a never say die attitude that is very patient and very much about one step and progressing, and in time we'll get there. And I love that approach, because I know that that's what it's going to take in order for all areas of our community to wake up. So that was one of the things that I really felt was very inspiring about you, was your constant application to your message. And the second thing is that I think a lot of our listeners, and I try to read between the lines a little bit, but I think a lot of our listeners can take a lot from that piece of, when you find your message, stay true to it and never waver, even in the face of objection or rejection. And together we can make a profound difference and a massive difference in the lives of the people who are suffering, and the lives of the people who will potentially suffer without the message that we have. So thank you for being such an advocate and such a pioneer, with such a loud voice and a very educated voice, which is what we need. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was very kind of you. But we just got to keep at it. We'll get there in the end.
Yes, I love that.
And I think my two takeaways were the N equals 1. I think everybody should do an N equals 1. I think that don't poo-poo the diet until you try it. And if it works for you, then you're on the right thing. If it doesn't work for you, then maybe you need to trial something else, such as, there's so many out there, but if we look at it, it's about real food, and it is about us not having refined sugars and foods like that. So I think your N equals 1 was brilliant. I loved watching it when you talked about it and looking at all your markers. They were just amazing. So that's number 1 for me. And number 2 is I'm on the same realm as Karen. I just love that you found your passion, and you do speak with such amazing passion, and that message is getting out. And let's go for 120 talks this year. How about that?
Sounds good. I'll be sick of the sound of my own voice. But no. It's, I think the N equals 1. If I just finish on that. I mean, I think I just encourage people to try it for a month. So just give it a go for a month. It's not going to kill you. Just give away the processed food and eat real food without sugar and without starches for a month, and you'll be blown away. After that month, you'll never want to go back to the old way. You just try it for a month. Just persevere. It might be a bit hard the first week or two, but give yourself a month. And at the end of that month, if it's not for you, as you said, fine. But 90% of people will feel so fantastic. They'll have lost weight. They'll have reversed a lot of their metabolic ill health, and they'll be on this path forever. It'll be life-changing for them.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being a part of today's show and for sharing your wisdom, Peter. You've been amazing, amazing, amazing. So for all of our listeners, just remind us again, what's the best place for them to follow you?
Okay, fatlotofgood.com.au.
Awesome.
Which is the website associated with my book, which is available at all good bookstores, as they say, and online at all the usual places online. So, I think people will find it pretty interesting.
Fantastic. All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter. And for all of our listeners, make sure that you go to Fat Lot of Good and check it out, and make sure that you follow Peter. And if you've got any questions, any thoughts, please head on over to our Facebook page at allthews.facebook.com/up-for-a-chat. And you can also head on over to allthews.thewellnesscouch.com/up-for-a-chat, and you can post your comments and your questions right there as well. So make sure that you guys all tune in next week right here on Up for a Chat and become part of the ripple effect that's changing the world. And we are going to look so forward to seeing you on the ride. Bye for now, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this Wellness Couch podcast. Did you know we've launched a brand new Facebook group where you can chat about any podcast you like with a tribe of like-minded people? The group is called the Wellness Couch Tribe, and it's an inspirational digital meeting place to connect you to like-minded wellness lovers just like you. To locate it and come join us, simply search for The Wellness Couch Tribe wherever you enjoy Facebook.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.